right? Because that's what you do after crucifixion and resurrection. I'm going fishing. This is a kind of funny story because it's kind of an epilogue. We've all seen that movie, right? Where there's an ensemble cast that does different things, and then as the credit rolls, the person's picture will come up and they'll tell you what they did for the rest of their lives, right? I can name several movies that are like that, and this is that. This isn't just, and they lived happily ever after, which is kind of the end of Matthew. Mark doesn't know when to end, but, right? But Matthew, that's the end of Matthew. Luke, of course, is really Luke Acts. It's one book that, for some inexplicable reason, was cut in half, and John was stuck in the middle. So, but it's unique in that it kind of gives you follow-up about how everybody carried on. And it almost feels stuck on the end. In fact, there's been some scholarship that argued that this section of John was written by a different author and put on later. But we think not. Hear me? Say on the spot. We think not, because the earliest manuscripts that we have include this story in John. So what is it? What is it for? When we look at the structure of this, we see the point clearly by looking at how it flows. It starts in 20, 28, and 29, when Thomas says, "My Lord and my God." You heard that last week. "My Lord and my God." And then there's a little section that says, the purpose of this gospel is, right? Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may come to believe. Or some translations might say continue to believe. That Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you might have life in his name. Right? That's the end of John 20. And then today happens. And then the gospel concludes with a statement. This testimony is true and is written by someone who was there. So the whole structure of it gives purpose, the story purpose. Which raises the question, why is this important enough to put in there? Well, one reason is that this story connects with the rest of the gospel. It's kind of a summary of all the things that Jesus did in his ministry. So that those elements of fish and bread immediately call to mind the feeding of the 5,000, right? Jesus blesses it and gives it to them. That's immediately putting us with the Last Supper and that final discourse. The fact that they caught nothing, and then with guidance, caught 153 fish, right? That's a lot of fish. Like, Dick told me this morning that and he told me to be sure and tell you. I asked him for permission to mention it. That he caught one halibut that was 60 pounds and another halibut that was 30, which was their boat limit. So how much would 153 fish weigh? That is a lot of work they had that afternoon, right? And that abundance is astonishing. It's just like God, isn't it? The same God that made 900 gallons of wine. I'm still blown away by that. 900 gallons at the end of the well. I bet some of that wine's still there. How could you drink 900 gallons? That's God for you, right? That's God. Just abundant provision. This reflects that. It's also calling to mind the call stories of four of them, right? The sons of Zebedee and Peter and Nathaniel. It's the third appearance of Jesus, and yet they still don't know him, and there's some puzzlement to that. So it connects to his ministry. the abundance of God, to the feeding of people, to the proclamation of what will happen in someone's life, to the blessing Jesus gave them. In telling Peter what's going to happen to him, Jesus, of course, is talking about Peter's crucifixion, which is recorded in the first letter of Clement to the Corinthians, happened under Nero in Rome in the late 60s. Eusebius talks about it too. Everything's there, except one thing. Did you catch the thing that's missing from Jesus' ministry? Because it actually is there, but we might not notice it at first. A healing. A healing. Where's the healing? It's there. He heals Peter's heart. Peter's broken heart. Peter has only himself to blame for that denial. And he's living with that burden of denial. And his heart is broken. So he goes fishing. Many of us sympathize with that. In all of these connections, in the verification by the gospel writer to say this is true, this is an act that Jesus does that's every bit as miraculous as the raising of Lazarus. And it's the same thing. And that little story, again, is bookended. It's very interesting, the wordplay that goes on in the bookending, because there's the disciple Jesus loved, right, who recognizes him and calls it out. And then at the end, which we didn't read today, I encourage you to go read it. The disciple Jesus loved follows Peter and Jesus as they're talking. And that loved word is very interesting. There's interesting wordplay there. Because the disciple Jesus loved is loved agape. You remember we talked a few weeks ago or a month or two ago about C.S. Lewis and his discussion of the four loves. And agape is the highest form of love, the charity of God, the love of God. And here's this disciple framing the story with agape. And then Jesus and Peter have this conversation. And at first, Jesus says, Peter, Simon Peter, do you agape me? And Peter says, I phileo you. Now remember, phileo is familiar love. That's your old worn out pair of jeans that your spouse is trying to get rid of behind your back, right? That's your dog. That's the people you've known since kindergarten. That's filial. Familiar love. Friendship love. No, filial is friendship love. That's the people who are headed somewhere together. And part of Peter's problem the whole time that Jesus was talking about his ministry is that Peter was headed there, and he wasn't with Christ as Christ told him what's happening. And he kept refuting it because it didn't fit Peter's vision of where they were headed. I feel you. Jesus said, yeah, do you agape me? And Peter says, I feel you. So Jesus says, do you feel me? And Peter's feelings are hurt. He says, yes, I feel you. Peter never works around to agape, the agape that frames that interchange. But Jesus has taken Peter's hand and walked him back through those three denials. Each time he repeats the question, he walks him one step back to the point where he began, where he had never denied Christ yet. He rebuilds his heart. He creates wholeness and transforms that broken heart into a whole heart. A complete healing. It's the most beautiful healing. It is the most beautiful gift from Jesus to Peter. He creates a new heart in Peter, a 36:26, a new heart I will give you, and a new spirit I will put within you. And I will remove from your body the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. That's exactly identical, the same creative power that we hear of in the first chapter of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then John 1:3, all things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. Jesus has recreated Peter's inner self. He didn't fix it. He didn't fill in the cracks. He created something new. It's exactly the same creative act as when he calls Lazarus come out. Exactly the same thing as when he called the world into being. And then he says of Lazarus, unbind him. And he says to Peter, tend my sheep. Jesus is still giving that gift. We are going to step out, not off, I hope, and say, we're all a mess. And Jesus fixes it. He creates something new in us because we are forgiven as Peter is forgiven. And in that same way, the whole reason for including this story is to show that healing. Because that's what we, as followers of Christ, have available to us. Jesus continues to offer us redemptive grace. In spite of all we do, in spite of all we have done, and he continues to entrust his ministry and his message to those who have denied him. It's really a final telling of the ultimate Easter message, which is also from 1 John. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Amen.